Hi, my name is MK Williams and I'm a published author. Today I'm going to start a 5-part series to help you understand how to land a podcast. So podcasts are just like Hansel. Right now they are super hot and everybody seems to be either starting a podcast or wants to be on a podcast or some combination thereof. I've actually been on several podcasts, so I wanted to share with you my tips on how to land a podcast, how to maximize the impact of your appearance on that podcast, how to prepare for it, finally what you should do once it's live, and then I'm going to throw in a bonus of my favorite podcasts to listen to that are bookish related and a few that are not. So I hope that you will find this helpful and informative, and here is how you can land your podcast. Okay, so today is my first video in the series on how to land a podcast and maximize your appearance on it. So first I'm going to talk to you about how to land a podcast interview. So while it's similar to the process you would use to land an interview on a book website, a lot of websites will do book reviews and author interviews. For a podcast, I think you need to do a little bit more research. So the first thing is you should be listening to podcasts and finding ones that you really like and connect with. So it's not just a matter of you're going to be on a podcast and be like, hey, buy my book, and millions of people are going to buy it. So you want to make sure you're finding a podcast that you genuinely enjoy listening to. Is it within your genre of sci-fi or mystery or crime thriller or romance or any of those other subgenres that you can find? Or is it just a general book podcast? Is a podcast that has nothing to do with a book, but you still really enjoy it and you think that you would have a good story to share with that audience? Because if you're genuinely enjoying the podcast and what it has to offer, then hopefully you're commenting and you're following up and you're truly engaging with the podcast creator and their interviewers beforehand. So if you're just really inauthentic and you're just going in like, hey, I want to be on your podcast, it's like, okay, cool. But if you are commenting and it's genuine, right? So it has to be that you really liked something, you really connected with an interview, you had something to add, there was a question that was thrown out and you had an answer for it. Really connect and show that you can add value and that you're receiving value. Don't just do like a quote like, hey, I want to be on your podcast, because that's not going to be successful. I've also found several of the podcasts I've been on through the Goodreads forums. I've said it once, I'll say it again. If you're an author and you're not on Goodreads, I don't even know what you're doing. Like, what? Are you living under a rock? Probably. I don't know how you're watching this video then, but hopefully if you're watching this video because you are an engaged author, you're on Goodreads and you're on the forums, because it's just chock full of advice and information and support and community. And a few times there have been people saying, hey, I have this podcast that I'm launching, I just need to get some authors on there, and I was like, sign me up. Or other times where I've just found one that I've listened to and then I've gone and, gone through the process of pitching them. So Goodreads can be a great source to find ones to be on if you currently aren't listening to podcasts or you're trying to figure out what's going on with this trend. I would say that you should have a pitch ready. And what you want to put in there is why your story would be of value to that podcast audience. So you know what value you're going to get. You're going to get exposure for you as an author, to build your brand and to promote your books. But what are you going to provide that's valuable to the podcast interviewer and their audience? Because that person is looking for content that is going to get people engaged, keep people listening and tuning in, keep people subscribing. So what can you provide to them? Either it's a new audience exposure, you have a specific topic they haven't covered yet. Really have something refined to say, I would love to be on your podcast, I really enjoyed these episodes, I noticed you haven't covered this topic, I would love to talk about it, here's XYZ that I can say, happy to have this discussion with you of when I can be on the podcast and be part of that. So you really just want to refine that just like you would for any other interview that you are trying to pitch or website you're trying to be on. So you want to think about how it's not about your book, it's about how you can share. And that's the number one thing that I'll continue to reiterate through this series, but primarily on landing the podcast, it's what can you bring to that audience. So keep that in mind as you're pitching podcast interviews to line up. I hope that you have found this helpful. If you have, please click like or subscribe below, and now you can get back to writing your book.